The mountain valley under the crimson sky was illuminated by bright flashes, and angry cries came from all sides. "Kill him!" The half-naked young man with his hands tied behind his back looked around in confusion. He didn't understand where he was or what was happening to him. The leader of the beastmen, raising his sword, shouted that divine punishment would befall the insignificant man who invaded their land. For thousands of years, the lands of the beastmen had been isolated from the outside world. And now, for the first time in history, a man had come against them. The captured boy heard cries that this was war, and that the man who broke the treaty had brought divine punishment upon himself. The young man frowned. Until recently, he was in a cave. How did he get here, and was he really destined to die in this strange world? 5 hours ago, a group of cleaners was preparing to descend into the cave. The group leader urged Tsuyoshi to finish eating faster. They were on their way soon. The elder warned the boy not to go anywhere alone. There would be 2 more teams in the cave, and if he relaxed, he wouldn't get even a piece of metal. Tsuyoshi, finishing his noodles, asked in surprise why so many people were descending into an ordinary C-rank cave. The man said with a sigh that these are the times they live in. There are many like them now. They are not the only heroes. At this time, a shout from the duty member of the group was heard from the street. He announced a general assembly. The elder looked out into the street. The duty officer was waving his hand and shouting that the heroes were coming. The man turned to Tsuyoshi and said that it was time for them to go out too. The cleaning team headed towards the cave, and one of the men said that the closer they got, the more uneasy he became. Tsuyoshi's companion remarked that if a C-rank cave was like this, it was scary to imagine what an A-rank or S-rank one would look like. The team approached the magical barrier, the elder said thoughtfully. It was strange that there were several minions of darkness here. A leg in armor appeared from behind the magical barrier. The heroes, having completed their work, were leaving the cave. The young hero in shining armor told his red-haired companion that they could easily get the reward, and she briefly agreed. The cleaners respectfully let the heroes through, because they are so cool, and those who failed the awakening test are left with nothing but cleaning the caves. The elder politely thanked the heroes for their hard work and asked if they could now enter. The red-haired girl replied, "Of course we will." Tsuyoshi Tsukishiro looked at the heroes with longing. He also dreamed of becoming one of them. But instead, he was just a cleaner. After the heroes defeat the minions of darkness in the caves, the cleaners, known as scavengers, come to collect the remains. Tsuyoshi stepped into the cave in his garbage man costume, regretfully thinking that he failed the awakening test due to his weakness. Even though he wanted to become a hero, garbage men and heroes live in completely different worlds. The team entered the cave. It turned out to be not so big. The leader said that the cave would close in 4 hours, so they needed to work faster. In 4 hours, everyone should gather near the exit. The young man, clearing away the rubble, saw something resembling metal armor flash among the stones. Tsuyoshi couldn't believe his eyes. Had luck really smiled on him? The guy quickly cleared away the rubble, and it turned out that he had found a piece of a shield. The older brother, who saw Tsuyoshi's find, said that it was a good sign, that at least something worthwhile would come out of it. Apparently, their parents had helped them from heaven. The delighted young man raised his head, smiled, and said that he would look deeper. His brother agreed, but reminded him that they would meet at the entrance to the cave in 3.5 hours. The young man replied that he remembered and quickly began to dig. He knew that usually something worthwhile lay at depth, and he was in a hurry to look. 3.5 hours passed, but the guy still hadn't found anything else. He was upset. It wouldn't be good to leave the cave with only one piece of the shield. The young man heard his older brother's shout, and he reminded the boy that it was time for them to go. Tsuyoshi replied that he was almost finished. The guy didn't want to leave. He knew his find wouldn't cover even a day of Karina's stay in the hospital, which meant he had to find something else. And suddenly, not far away, the young man noticed a well. He looked at it in surprise and thought that it smelled of treasure. The guy carefully bent down to see what was there. He didn't understand where the well in the cave came from. It looked like it was dry. There could be something valuable there. Tsuyoshi was confident that if he found the surviving item, he would cover all of Karina's hospital bills. He looked carefully at the bottom of the well. A golden glow emanated from below, and upon closer inspection, Tsuyoshi saw a skeletal hand sticking out of the bottom of the well, and a ring glittering on one of the fingers. Without thinking, Tsuyoshi descended into the well. It seemed the heroes had not noticed these remains. The young man removed the ring from the skeleton's hand, asking the heavens for forgiveness. A wide golden ring with strange markings began to glow in the boy's hands, making it clear that Tsuyoshi was holding a valuable item. The young man was delighted. He finally did it. He found a treasure. Such equipment sells for a high price. The guy decided to put on the ring for now, and later asked Mr. Nakazato to find out his level. He had to hurry. Tsuyoshi put on the ring. As soon as the ring was on his finger, the young man felt that something was happening to him. Tsuyoshi, his mouth slightly open in surprise, looked at his hand. It seemed as if the glow from the ring permeated his entire body, transforming it. The guy didn't understand what was wrong with him. He was shaking and contorted. He tried to take off the ring, but couldn't. In horror, he asked what kind of ring it was. The game system reported that the Infinity Ring has recognized Tsuyoshi as its owner. From now on, he cannot remove it or change its owner, and an endless passage will open soon. The guy turned his head around in confusion and couldn't understand whose voice it was and what it all meant. Looking at his hand, Tsuyoshi saw with horror that a golden whirlwind was swirling around the ring. The guy asked in bewilderment what it was. Meanwhile, the golden whirlwind became wider and stronger, and the young man felt himself being drawn into this golden funnel. In desperation, he screamed at the top of his voice for someone to help him. The young man's cry burst out of the well and echoed throughout the cave. The older brother turned around in surprise and asked, "Was that Tsuyoshi shouting?" He hadn't arrived at the gathering place yet, which was strange since he had seen him recently. One of the men said that the guy probably went to look at another place. It's a pity that he couldn't become a hero. They decided to wait. There was still a little time left, and Tsuyoshi desperately tried to grab the rope, feeling that he was being pulled into the unknown. It seemed that the ring had opened a portal, and now some powerful force was pulling the guy there. Upon regaining consciousness, Tsuyoshi found himself in the captivity of the Beastman as one of the criminals awaiting his divine punishment at the altar. Apparently, divine punishment meant a devastating lightning strike on the altar. Tsuyoshi did not understand why he was sent to the sacred land of the Beastman. The Beast King, seated on the throne, briefly commanded the trial to begin. The general announced that today they would hold a trial of 3 criminals, one of them their brother, who sold secret information about their territory to elves and humans. Amidst the angry cries of the crowd, the defendant was brought in. He was tied up and shaking with fear. The Beastman shouted that he was a traitor and called for punishment on his head. The criminal was on his knees, and the general proclaimed that divine punishment would come for him, and the crowd unanimously repeated the call for divine punishment. The unfortunate man was pushed onto the altar, and the general proclaimed that, at the command of the Beast King, all criminals would face divine punishment. The condemned man rolled to the place of his death, hearing that the hammer of the divine king, surrounded by lightning strikes, would erase all the sins of criminals. No one has ever managed to escape from this altar of the kingdom of divine punishment. At that very moment, lightning of enormous force struck the criminal. The entire space around was illuminated by a bluish light. The unfortunate man, whose body was struck by a huge lightning bolt, screamed in horror, but soon fell silent. The crowd watching the execution continued to rage, shouting calls for the punishment of all traitors and for their execution by divine punishment. The general proclaimed that divine punishment would befall the first man in history who invaded the land of the Beastmen. This man declared war on them and violated their treaty. Tsuyoshi desperately tried to escape from the huge paw. The boys screamed that there was some kind of misunderstanding. He ended up here completely by accident. His sister was waiting for him and begged for help. The huge beast man growled fiercely at Tsuyoshi that he had enough of complaining and punched him hard in the chest. Tears streamed down the boy's face. He was sure he couldn't die here. Karina needed him too much. What should he do? The beastman contemptuously threw the young man at his feet, and he continued to lament that he should become a hero, perplexed at how everything turned out this way. The crowd of beastmen went wild, shouting that humans were pathetic insects, and how could a mere human be able to defeat a great beastman? Tsuyoshi was tied up and thrown onto the altar, and cries of demanding that the sinner be punished followed him. The young man helplessly fell onto the altar, but at that moment, instead of fear, anger awoke in him. He repeated to himself again that he could not die here. He had to do something. Unexpectedly for the beastman, the young man jumped up, trying to dodge the lightning. He was driven by one thought: he cannot die in such a place. The young man's trick worked. Lightning struck the place where he had just been, and from the strong blow, Tsuyoshi fell back onto the altar, but remained alive. The beastmen's mouths dropped open in surprise. For the first time, lightning had not struck the criminal. They stuttered and asked each other how this boy had dodged the divine lightning. Among the crowd of observers stood a young, attractive girl, who, with her mouth open in surprise, also watched the impudent man. Finally, the general expressed general bewilderment, asking how the man had escaped divine punishment. It was unforgivable. The miserable offender must die. The young beastman watched closely what was happening in the arena and how this young alien was behaving. Meanwhile, Tsuyoshi jumped up on the altar, turned to the general, swore loudly, and said that he refused to die here. But the next second, lightning struck again. This time it hit the young man. Tsuyoshi arched his back and shouted loudly, "No!" The Beastman general, seeing this, laughed and asked who said that the lightning of divine punishment strikes only once. He was sure that the pathetic man was dead, and now it was the turn of the next victim. The Beastmen shook their fists and shouted, "Divine punishment!" The girl lowered her eyes and sadly whispered that it was a useless struggle. After being struck by lightning, Tsuyoshi continued to whisper that he couldn't die here. The ring on his hand began to glow, and he heard that the divine selection system of the Infinity Ring had been activated. Tsuyoshi's body glowed with a golden light, and a familiar voice announced that the system identification was complete and work on creating the ideal physical form was beginning. The young beastmen watched without stopping as the boy who had come to them from the human world transformed. The divine lightning continued to pierce Tsuyoshi's body, but he did not writhe in convulsions like everyone else, but seemed to be absorbing the energy. The general stared at the altar, unable to believe that this frail youth was still alive. At this time, Tsuyoshi rose up in the air and seemed to be hanging on a lightning bolt. The creation of the ideal physical form continued. Now all the beastmen present looked at the altar in surprise and asked each other what the hell was going on. The young man's body changed right before the eyes of the astonished beastmen. He was surrounded by flashes of lightning. The system reported that the divine eye skill had been used. The guy felt something calling him. He sat down on the altar and slowly walked towards the hammer. The lightning bolt still surrounded Tsuyoshi as he headed towards the stairs that led to the huge hammer. The beastmen could not believe that a man was going to the divine hammer, which no one dared to approach for fear of being incinerated. But the young man, as if hypnotized, approached the huge golden hammer step by step. The system reported that the skill, divine consciousness, and absolute cloning had been applied. There was a dead silence. Everyone held their breath, watching the man who slowly walked towards the shrine, the divine hammer. Tsuyoshi, obeying the call of the hammer, approached it step by step. The creation of the ideal physical form was nearing completion. The general was shaking with anger. He whispered that it was incredible. Except for the divine king himself, no one had ever come so close to the hammer. The young beastman smiled and exclaimed with delight that this guy was trying to lift the hammer of the divine king. But how was that possible? Tsuyoshi slowly climbed to the top of the stairs. His body changed greatly. The young man asked the hammer in surprise, "Is it he who is calling him?" As if in response to the young man's question, the hammer trembled and rose from its pedestal, and stones began to swirl around it. Tsuyoshi continued to ask the hammer why it was calling him so persistently. The system reported that the creation of the ideal physical form was completed and the special status of Chosen One was applied. At that moment, a huge hammer rose into the air and began to slowly move towards the mysterious man. In those few minutes, Tsuyoshi changed beyond recognition. Lightning flashed from his eyes. He raised his hand and summoned a hammer. The beastmen watched silently as it happened. No one could understand what was happening. Tsuyoshi, as if enchanted, repeated that the divine hammer was calling him, and the lightning bolts around the young man grew brighter and brighter. The guy raised his left hand. Lightning of enormous power struck the hand of the renewed Tsuyoshi and disintegrated into small sparks. At that very second, a divine hammer descended from the outstretched hand on which the ring was placed. The young man clenched his hand and looked at the divine weapon with blazing eyes. Turning to the hammer, the boy exclaimed that he would use its power. The system reported that Tsuyoshi had reached level 3 and received the divine hammer, but he was unable to use the hammer's power due to a lack of skills. The young and pretty beast woman whispered in shock that the human had lifted the divine hammer. The general growled. How could a mere human do this? It was simply unbelievable. They couldn't let him touch the sacred hammer. Even the great beast king couldn't lift it. Anyone who lifted the divine hammer would become the head of the beastmen. The general was sure that this was some kind of mistake. Tsuyoshi looked at his hands in surprise. Lightning was still sparkling around him. The guy felt that for some reason he had become much stronger. He activated the screen to check his status. The guy was surprised to find that he had reached the 3rd level. But how is this possible, since he had always been very weak? While Tsuyoshi was studying the skills he had acquired, the enraged general rushed towards the intruder to take the sacred hammer from him. The boy was so engrossed in learning the skills that he didn't immediately notice an enemy approaching him. The general dropped down behind Tsuyoshi. He was sure that he had to kill this impudent man who dared to encroach on their shrine. Burning with anger, the general growled at the damned human not to dare touch the divine hammer of the beastman with his filthy hands. The crowd roared with approval. The the beastmen shouting that their great General Ryota would not allow this little man to behave as he pleased and would help them regain the pride of the beastmen. Ryota was very determined. He didn't know how this boy was able to avoid divine punishment and even lift the divine hammer, but he was sure that it was some kind of misunderstanding. With his eyes blazing menacingly and his fangs snapping, General Ryota shouted commandingly at Tsuyoshi that he must immediately return the divine hammer of the beastmen to its place. The general's face twisted into a grimace and he growled angrily that the violator of the treaty must accept his punishment and die. The game notified Tsuyoshi that his passive skill Divine Eye had been activated, allowing him to reveal detailed information about any item. The young man hadn't quite figured out what kind of passive skill Divine Eye this was yet, and he turned his gaze to the enraged general. At the same moment, a blue window appeared above Reda's head, indicating the general's status, level, and weapon. Tsuyoshi understood what the Divine Eye is. Now he can see all the information about the general. General Ryota took up his huge sword, his anger growing stronger as he couldn't understand how a puny human dared to oppose him. The general brandished his sword and said that he would have mercy on the man and allow him to die without suffering. But to the general's surprise, the man was able to dodge his sword. Tsuyoshi was still trying to avoid a fight. He peacefully extended his hand forward and told the general to stop. There had been some misunderstanding. In fact, Tsuyoshi was afraid to engage in combat with the general. He understood that he would never be able to defeat a warrior of the 84th level. Rita angrily shouted at the little man to shut up. The young man begged the general to listen to him and instinctively blocked the blow of the sword with a hammer. The girl who watched the battle thought that the fate of a human was not to be envied. Ryota is one of the 5 great generals of the Beast King, and even among the beastmen he is an incredibly strong opponent. Everyone was sure that Ryota would cut the man into pieces with one swing of his sword, but suddenly an explosion sounded on the altar and everyone saw a bright flash of light. To quickly finish off the man, Ryota used the quick strike skill, but to the surprise of the general and all the onlookers, the hammer was protected by Tsuyoshi. The boy clenched his teeth, straining all his strength to withstand the crushing blow of the Beastman general. Tsuyoshi couldn't believe he had blocked that blow. He looked at the hammer in confusion and felt like his hands weren't obeying him. That hammer was incredibly heavy. The general was shocked. He looked in confusion at the boy who managed to block his most powerful attack with only a hammer in his hands. But Ryota quickly came to his senses and became even more angry. He rushed at Tsuyoshi. The general shouted that the guy was just lucky the hammer saved him, but next time it won't happen. The guy again tried to tell the general that it was a mistake, that he was not from this world, and asked the general to finally hear him. But the Beastman general was not going to listen to the pathetic little man. He had just failed to kill him and was in a hurry to defend his impeccable reputation as a warrior. The general grabbed Tsuyoshi with his huge hand and squeezed him tightly. The young man felt that his fragile body might not be able to withstand such a grip. Ryota decided that if he couldn't cut this guy down, he would launch him into the sky and finish him off with an earthquake. The skill screen appeared in front of Tsuyoshi again, and he saw that his absolute clone skill allowed him to copy any enemy skill. Tsuyoshi knew he had to act quickly or he might die, and in a matter of seconds he realized how the cloning skill worked. The description said that he should feel the opponent's heart with his hand. All this time Ryota held the guy in his huge paw. The young man realized that in order to use the passive cloning skill, he had to touch General Ryota's chest. But how to do it? The boy tensed and slipped from the strong Beastman general's grip. After making a circle around the general, Tsuyoshi briefly touched his hand to the area of his chest where his heart should be. Suddenly, the formidable general felt a surge of tenderness. He remembered that he really did have a heart, and in surprise, he released the hated little man. Tsuyoshi, falling down, saw that the signs with the general's skills were circling around him. In a split second, he had to choose a skill for cloning. It turned out that the Beastman general had a lot of useful skills. Tsuyoshi's eyes were wide open. There were so many of them, and how could he choose just one skill? General Ryota, who had been at a loss, quickly came to his senses and, stuttering, asked Tsuyoshi what he was doing. Anger flashed in the general's eyes again. He was very annoyed that he still hadn't been able to kill this man. He swung his sword and shouted, "Take that!" Meanwhile, the young man chose a skill for cloning. It was the skill Heaven Shaker. The guy decided that this skill should be suitable for the hammer and decided to use it. The system reported that the skill Sky Shaker was copied, and General Tsuyoshi responded to his cry. He had said many times that he could not die here. And then Ryota saw with horror that this guy had used his own skill, Sky Shaker. And for a moment the general froze in surprise. Then he asked in surprise because it was incredible how the guy was able to use his skill. Meanwhile, the skill began to work. A stream of furious energy was directed at the place where Ryota was. Everything around turned into a solid stone mess. The crowd of beastmen watched this incredible battle with their mouths open. They could not believe that this frail youth was still alive, and the famous General Ryota could not kill him. A stream of energy and stones surrounded the general, but despite its terrifying power, it was unable to harm him. Soon, the attack died down, and Ryota looked questioningly at his huge hands. Until now, no one had tried to attack him using his own skill. To his great surprise, the general, having examined his body, said that he did not feel any pain at all and even felt pleasant. Tsuyoshi read the system notifications that since he was at level 3 without a profession or weapon, he was unable to damage the enemy. The young man was upset. He had copied a very powerful skill, but unfortunately he couldn't use it fully yet. It was a shame. And the general was again overcome with anger. How dare this worthless little man attack him? Ryota took up his sword again. Brandishing his fearsome weapon, the general rushed at Tsuyoshi. This time he was confident that he would kill the man. But then the sky turned red and a loud commanding cry rang out. Enough! Everyone froze. Every beastman knew that voice. The crowd began to move. Everyone recognized the Beast King. They decided that the Beast King himself had gone on the attack. Another explosion was heard on the sacred altar, and those present realized that the Beast King himself had landed on the altar. A powerful explosion almost knocked Tsuyoshi off his feet. He clenched his teeth and instinctively shielded himself from the new attack. But, to the surprise of everyone present, the Beast King silently sank to his knees, no one understanding what was happening. The Beast King bowed his head in submission and knelt on the altar in clouds of dust. Tsuyoshi stared wide-eyed at the powerful, muscular body of the young Beast King, who fell to his knees before him, lowered his head in submission, and did not rise. The beastmen's faces were distorted with horror and surprise. No one understood why the ruler fell to his knees before the alien, who was supposed to die on the altar. Finally, the king slowly stood up and walked towards Tsuyoshi. He said in a friendly manner that it seemed the divine hammer had chosen him. The boy didn't know what to say. He looked at the king with all his eyes, and he calmly put his hands on the boy's shoulders and said that the gods had sent them a sign. The Beast King smiled and explained that for hundreds of thousands of years, Tsuyoshi had been the first one chosen by the hammer. Addressing his people, the king said that no one could lift the divine hammer except this man. Tsuyoshi could not believe what was happening. The beastmen looked at their king with bewilderment. It was clear that most of them were very unhappy with what was happening. The Beast King, pointing his hand at Tsuyoshi, continued. He said that if this youth was truly the future ruler of the beastmen, then they should allow him to grow up. The crowd became agitated. Many said that he was not a beastman. How could he be a ruler? The beastman glared angrily at Tsuyoshi. General Ryota expressed the general opinion and distrust. Turning to the Beast King, he said that this guy is a human. The Beast King asked, "So what, did the prophecy say that the leader had to be a beastman?" Turning to the general, the king asked if he meant to say that they should ignore the future hope of their people. The frightened general fell on one knee before the king and said that his majesty was right in the prophecy and nothing was said about it. But if he was not a beastman, the king turned to the young man and asked his name, and he introduced himself as Tsuyoshi Tsukishiro. The king, turning to Tsuyoshi, said that if he was ready to take on this burden, then the beastman would agree. But now he was still too weak. The lord said that Tsuyoshi should become stronger within a year and return to the land of the beastmen, and then they would see if the young man was worthy of being their leader. The king reached out his hand to Tsuyoshi and made some strange mark. Then he told the youth that if he did not return within a year, the king would use this mark to find him and kill him. The boy rubbed his forehead in confusion, and the king said that his people would accept such an outcome and asked what Tsuyoshi's answer was. But instead of the guy, the words, "I agree," were already flying. Everyone agreed to such conditions. The red-haired girl screamed at Tsuyoshi with all her might to become stronger and gain freedom. He had long ago paid attention to this girl. She should have been punished right after him. The young man decided to use the Divine Eye skill and see who she was. But to the young man's surprise, he saw neither the girl's name nor her status, only the 72nd warrior level. And the girl shouted that it was better to be alive and that Tsuyoshi should not miss the opportunity given by the gods. The guy was very surprised, level 72. Could a girl really be that strong? And why did they want to punish her? Tsuyoshi looked at the girl tenderly. Surprisingly, she seemed very beautiful to him. Unexpectedly for himself, the young man raised his hand, waved to the young representative of the beast people, and loudly shouted, "Thank you." The girl's words sank deep into Tsuyoshi's mind. He realized that she was right. This was an amazing opportunity, and he had to survive in order to return back to his world. Tsuyoshi turned to the Beast King and said that he agreed. He accepted his offer, but he had one condition. The Lord of the Beastmen chuckled. What other condition? The impudence of this man surprised the king. No one had ever set conditions for him. Tsuyoshi pointed his finger at the girl and said that she would go with him. The young man explained to the king that this girl would be useful to him. The young criminal, doomed to death, opened her mouth in surprise and asked why her. Tsuyoshi smiled and thought that now he and the girl were even, and they definitely wouldn't be able to kill her. The beastmen finally dispersed, and the young man was left alone in this new world for him. It was already deep into the night. Looking at the moon and the shining stars, he again replayed in his mind what had happened to him. Judging by the voice he heard in the well, this story began because of the infinity ring he found. Tsuyoshi was again in his garbage man costume and was looking at the ring thoughtfully. He knew that he could not take off this ring, but thanks to it he gained these strange abilities. The young man did not understand how to return to his world. Suddenly, the guy heard a pleasant female voice behind him. The girl said that the preparations were complete and called Tsuyoshi master. In front of him was the same girl, but in gear and with a weapon. She said that she had decided to serve her savior. Tsuyoshi smiled widely. Hearing a cute girl with ears call you master was incredibly pleasant. The young man was very embarrassed and said that it was nothing, because she had helped him too. And from that moment on, he suggested that they support each other and not call each other master or servant. The girl frowned and said that Tsuyoshi didn't understand how much it meant to her, since he gave her a second chance. She gently took the young man by the hands and said that before him, no one had ever thanked her or protected her. Looking devotedly into Tsuyoshi's eyes, the girl asked him to let her call him master. The girl touchingly blinked her long eyelashes and, looking into Tsuyoshi's face, said that he had become her miracle and that she wanted to dedicate her whole life to him. The guy's nose started bleeding from embarrassment. He said that if she wanted, she could call him master and laughed embarrassedly. The delighted girl said that it was time for them to go. Turning to her master, she added that it was already quite late and went ahead. Tsuyoshi obediently followed this amazing girl, as if enchanted. Looking at her, she advised him to watch his step. The guy sighed with relief. Now he liked this adventure much more. They walked through the mountainous terrain. Bright stars shone in the sky, and Tsuyoshi, looking around in surprise, thought how amazing this other world was. But then the guy came to his senses and stopped himself, asking himself what he was thinking about, because his sick sister Karina was waiting for him. The system notified Tsuyoshi that the endless passage was currently unavailable to him, with a recovery time of 24 hours. And then Tsuyoshi realized that he had indeed entered an endless passage and found himself in this world, which meant that if he entered it again, he would be able to return back. After a while, the ring began to glow, and the young man heard that the endless passage had opened, but he was not sure whether he would be able to return. A golden whirlwind swirled around the ring again, and Tsuyoshi realized that yes, he really was finally going to return home. In the place where Tsuyoshi had just stood, only a golden vortex of the portal was spinning. The girl could not understand where her master had gone. The young man felt himself being pulled into the portal again, and he knew the sensations would not be pleasant. The cycle finally stopped, and Tsuyoshi found himself in a protective helmet and a scavenger suit, golden flashes still glittering around him. Looking around, the young man realized that he was still sitting in the same well, and in front of him was a skeleton's hand sticking out. Looking at his hands, the guy realized that he seemed to have returned. On his left hand, Tsuyoshi saw a ring, which meant that everything that happened was not a dream. He decided to check his status. The system screen confirmed that the abilities he received in the other world were preserved. His level is still level 3, but why is the Divine Hammer still in his inventory since he remained in the Beastman world? The system explained that the characteristics are available in both worlds, and in order to use an item from another world, it must first be placed in the Divine Inventory of Consciousness. If the level is synchronized, then its increase is possible in both worlds. Tsuyoshi was able to bring the Divine Hammer to this world because it was in the Divine Inventory of Consciousness. At this time, Tsuyoshi heard Nakazato's voice from above, asking what was going on and demanding that the young man get out before the cave closed. Tsuyoshi asked in surprise what the men were doing there and why they had been waiting for him for several hours. And then the young man began to understand that, despite the fact that he had spent at least 5 hours in another world, nothing seemed to have changed here. The brother grumbled that Tsuyoshi had been sitting here all this time. It was good that he had found him, and once again demanded that he come out. If the cave closed, the young man would fall into a trap. Tsuyoshi grabbed the rope and climbed up, soon appearing on the surface of the well. While the young man was climbing out of the mysterious well, He realized that time had stopped in this world, so no one noticed his movement to another world. It was all quite strange. While the boy was in another world, time didn't pass here. Tsuyoshi thought with a grin that it sounded like a manga plot. The young man wondered if, while he was in this world, time had stopped in the other world too. Turning around, Tsuyoshi looked at the skeleton's hand, which was still sticking out from the bottom of the well, and he wondered who the infinity ring belonged to. And suddenly a thought struck Tsuyoshi. He looked at his brother with concern, who asked what had happened. The young man asked excitedly. The awakening test is tomorrow after all. That's true, he wasn't mistaken. In the pouring rain, covered in blood, Tsuyoshi gritted his teeth and carried his wounded younger sister. Karina trustingly wrapped her arms around her brother's neck and hid her face on his shoulder. Karina's legs were covered in blood, and the young man tried to carry the girl away from the disaster as quickly as possible. Everything around was destroyed. Buildings were falling, cars were overturning, the heroes were rushing to meet the monster to save people. Raising his head, Tsuyoshi saw a huge monster that was destroying everything around him. Escaping from falling debris, the guy was in a hurry to carry his sister away. Karina, raising her head, worriedly told her brother that she couldn't feel her legs. Tsuyoshi frowned. This was a bad sign. The girl asked her brother with concern what was wrong with mom and dad. Were they okay? And then the young man heard a huge explosion behind him. The monster stepped right into the place where Tsuyoshi and Karina's parents were. Everything around was ablaze. Debris was falling one after another. The guy started shaking. He realized that something irreparable had happened. The young man's eyes opened wide and he was shaking. But his mind refused to accept the fact that his parents could die. And then tears streamed from Tsuyoshi's eyes. He whispered that this couldn't be, clenched his teeth, but realized that mom and dad were no longer there. The boy stopped, the giant monster raging where he had left his parents. Tsuyoshi helplessly called out for his mom and dad, as if they could answer. The boy hugged his sister tighter. He was shaking violently. Tears were streaming down his face. Clenching his teeth, he decided to return to his parents. With tears streaming down his face and screaming, Tsuyoshi ran to where the tragedy had unfolded. And suddenly Tsuyoshi heard a familiar voice. It was calling the young man by name. The guy stopped. An adult, strong male hand was reaching out to him. Nakazato took Tsuyoshi by the shoulders and shook him. He said that the children cannot stop, otherwise they might die. The boy, shedding tears and stuttering, said that mom and dad, they seem to have died. Nakazato told Tsuyoshi not to even think about following them, otherwise the darkness would kill him. And Karina, the young man rushed to his parents. He said that mom and dad were still there. Nakazato stopped the guy and told him that he needed to calm down. He wouldn't be able to defeat the darkness. The monster continued to rage. Everything around was engulfed in flames. Tsuyoshi remembered his sister and said that Karina had something wrong with her legs. She needed to be taken to the hospital as soon as possible. Karina looked at her brother with concern, asking if he was really going to take the awakening test, since he had just returned from work that day. The nurse said that Karina was as caring as usual, but she also needed to rest more. Tsuyoshi asked his younger sister how she was feeling. Her legs still hurt. Karina was sitting in a wheelchair. The nurse replied that the nerve pain occurred regularly, so Karina needed to take medication. The girl snapped back, saying that she was fine, and although she couldn't get up, she had already gotten used to the pain. Tsuyoshi knew that his younger sister Karina was probably suffering greatly. Using his divine eye skill, he checked his sister's condition. The chance of her being able to walk again without assistance was only 1%. It was incredibly hard for Tsuyoshi to see Karina in a wheelchair. The chances of recovery were very low, and the girl was probably in very bad shape. Karina was supposed to live a normal life, go to school, have fun with friends, travel, and spend every day with a smile on her face. After the death of her parents, Karina is Tsuyoshi's only family, and he decides he doesn't want to see her suffer anymore. Even if the chances were close to zero, he wanted to make sure to get her back on her feet. The young man was sure that there was always a chance. There had to be some way to cure the girl. Tsuyoshi frowned. He thought that if he became a hero, he would be able to get more information and perhaps find a solution. And it wasn't just about Karina's illness. The young man simply wanted to live with dignity. Coming out into the street, the young man exclaimed that he was going to become the strongest hero. Passers-by looked suspiciously at the strange young man. After saying goodbye to his sister, Tsuyoshi headed off to take the awakening test. He entered a special building where the group courage test was taken. One of the lucky ones enthusiastically reported the results of the measurement. Level 3. Combat power 540. The administrator congratulated the young man, saying that he was now a hero. Handing over the badge, he told the boy to take the hero emblem that was created based on the results of his testing. The new hero walked down the hallway, chuckling. The girl next to him looked at him with admiration and wished him to reach rank CE and promised to throw a big party in honor of this event. It was Tsuyoshi Tsukishiro's turn. The administrator looked at the guy doubtfully and asked if he had decided to retake the test after failing the first one. The man adjusted his glasses and told Tsuyoshi to come inside and place his hand on the measuring device when he was ready. The administrator doubted that the results had changed in any way. Frowning, Tsuyoshi snapped back and said that they would find out soon. The administrator replied that if the guy failed the test once, the result would most likely be the same. The device measures his experience with high accuracy. The administrator grumbled that he had already seen many stubborn people like Tsuyoshi. The man continued to grumble, but the young man did not listen to him and, closing the door, entered the room. The previous young man had the same indicators, and this is quite normal. Tsuyoshi knew that he was now also a level 3, so he should become a hero. But how high was his combat power? Thinking like this, Tsuyoshi placed his right hand on the measuring device. He didn't know what his combat power was, but he was sure that the test had to be taken very seriously. Left in the measurement room, Tsuyoshi activated his ideal physical form, his muscles immediately expanding, his veins bulging, and flames erupting from his eyes. The entire measuring room was filled with incredible energy, and the hero's measurement began. The frightened administrator felt the building shaking. He did not understand what was happening. Perhaps an earthquake had started. But the building shook due to the release of energy when Tsuyoshi's skill was activated, and lightning bolts flew in all directions from his hands. The system announced the measurement results: Level 3, Combat Power 5,400. The 30-year record for the strength of a third-level hero was broken. The system informed Tsuyoshi that he ranked first in combat power among third-level heroes, with a hero with a combat power of 930 in second place. The young man couldn't believe his eyes. This is 10 times more than the guy who took the test before him. The young man looked at his hand with a smile. He remembered that on the altar he felt a surge of strength, but he did not expect that he became so much stronger. When Tsuyoshi realized that he had passed the hero test, he almost danced with joy. In any case, everything was going according to plan, and he would become the strongest hero. Tsuyoshi wondered what the power of the Divine King's hammer was. The boy remembered the powerful lightning bolts that struck his body and arm before the divine hammer descended upon it. The system notified that due to a number of reasons, the Divine King's hammer's potential could not be fully utilized, and Tsuyoshi could only use it for 1 second. Tsuyoshi decided that this should be enough to measure the combat power. He was very interested in how much it would increase. Taking the hammer in his left hand, Tsuyoshi placed his right hand on the measuring device and said, "Let's begin." The boy called upon the power of the divine hammer of the king, and at that very moment, lightning burst from his eyes and his veins tensed. The system notified Tsuyoshi that he had used the power of the Divine King's hammer for 1 second. Tsuyoshi's body turned into a flash of lightning, and he felt all his energy evaporate in the blink of an eye. Tsuyoshi realized that his strength was leaving him. He cried out for the device to measure his fighting strength as soon as possible, his body shaking from the flashes of lightning. The young man clenched his teeth. The veins on his face bulged. Sweat poured down. He addressed the device as if it were alive, asking it to tell him how much his combat power had increased. The hammer's energy grew stronger, and in a second the entire building turned into a continuous, sparkling lightning bolt, and the whirlpool of energy grew larger and larger. Soon energy burst out of the building and flashed over the city. Houses hummed and shook. People asked each other if it was an earthquake, and why there was so much lightning in the sky. The energy meter could not withstand such voltage, and a message appeared on the display that measurement was impossible due to overload. The equipment couldn't withstand the power and shut down, causing a short circuit, knocking out the entire building and, subsequently, the entire area. The high-rise buildings were plunged into darkness. The time for using the divine hammer ended, and at the same time, numerous bluish lightning bolts disappeared over the city, and silence fell. The terrified administrator threw open the door to the measuring room and exclaimed that the power had been cut off due to an overload and ordered everyone to evacuate immediately. By the time the administrator appeared, Tsuyoshi was almost exhausted. His head was spinning. He looked at the man and sighed heavily, and the administrator, stuttering, asked the young man who he was. Tsuyoshi left the measuring room. Unfortunately, he was unable to measure the hammer's power. He scratched his hair in confusion and thought that he shouldn't have underestimated the hammer, but the guy didn't expect that all his strength would run out in just 1 second. Tsuyoshi realized that he shouldn't use the king's divine hammer until it became much stronger. But still, the main goal of today was achieved. Tsuyoshi passed the awakening test. The young man smiled broadly. The hero's emblem hung around his neck. Now he officially became a hero. Having received the status of a hero, Tsuyoshi was sent to the training ground. Their coach was named Gaia. He is a hero in charge of training the rookies. Gaia was a 9th-level warrior, but his combat strength was only 1,200. He told the boys that the training would be difficult, so they should give it their all. The newcomers answered in unison. Yes. They were all eager to gain experience and go on adventures. Tsuyoshi was puzzled. The combat power was only 1,200 and the warrior was already at the 9th level. The young man was interested in what his combat power would be at the 9th level. Gaia was very dissatisfied with his role. Instead of training these brats, he would rather explore D-rank dungeons. The trainer said that tomorrow they would enter a D-rank dungeon, during which they would understand which job suited them best, and perhaps they would even receive a low-level item. The guys were shocked. Were they really going to go down into the dungeon? Shouldn't they first train a little and learn their profession before going down into the dungeon? Gaia sneered and replied that they didn't have time for that. Once they became heroes, they had to develop their skills in real combat. Hearing the boys grumbling, Gaia said that he had warned them that the training would be difficult, and if they weren't ready, then let them leave, no questions asked, just follow orders. Tsuyoshi realized that Gaia was simply taking out his anger on the boys after all. Heroes are also people with their weaknesses. The young man was warmed by the thought that, be that as it may, a girl of the 72nd level was waiting for him in another world. As soon as he remembered the girl, his nose started bleeding from excitement. He smiled broadly. The guy knew that as soon as the endless passage opened, he would go to her. Once in his apartment, Tsuyoshi turned on the news. They were saying that due to the earthquake, the power was cut off in some areas. Fortunately, there were no casualties. Tsuyoshi didn't pay much attention to the news. He knew what kind of earthquake it was. The guy looked at his watch and thought that everything was going great. Time was up. It was time to go to another world. There he would become stronger, choose a profession, and collect the necessary equipment. The young man turned to the ring and commanded that the endless passage be opened. The ring lit up. The boy already knew what would follow and was ready. Soon a golden whirlwind transported Tsuyoshi to another world. And the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was the starry sky and mountains. He returned again to the place from which he had been transferred to his world. A huge bright moon, surrounded by stars, was still shining in the sky. Twilight lay strangely on the mountains. It was night, as if he had never left. Tsuyoshi took a deep breath. He was back here, in the same place he had been transported from. Surprisingly, he was infinitely happy with this unusual landscape. Looking around, the guy realized that the appearance remained the same. Even his garbage man clothes were the same. It seems that once he returns to this world, time and equipment remain. And then Tsuyoshi heard the pleasant voice of the girl he liked so much. She asked the master if something had happened. A little embarrassed, he replied that everything was fine. Nothing had happened. Smiling, he turned to the girl and, decisively clenching his fist, asked her to lead him. His companion smiled broadly and exclaimed that she was glad to see the master so inspired. The girl said that there were 3rd-level goblins nearby, and would the master like to practice? Even though their level was low, these goblins were cunning and depraved, so the master must be extremely careful. Tsuyoshi smiled and said that if goblins are depraved, then it is the girl who needs to be more careful. She looked at him in surprise. Tsuyoshi couldn't believe there were goblins here. It was as if he was in a fantasy world. The young man was eagerly waiting for the divine selection system to show its effects. Turning to his companion, the guy exclaimed that this was excellent. The first target was the goblins. The young man and his battle companion carefully approached the cave. The girl warned her master to be careful and not to wake the goblin sentries. Tsuyoshi turned to the girl and said that she was level 72. She would definitely be able to defeat them with ease. He knew that her combat power was equal to 63,000. The girl blushed a little and asked how the master knew her level. Tsuyoshi became embarrassed and said that it was not just for nothing that he was her master. He asked if she could show him how high-level heroes fight. The girl objected that if she helped him, he would not earn experience points. Tsuyoshi scratched the back of his head in confusion. Was this really such a rule? And he wanted to see her in action. The girl became embarrassed and said that if the master insisted, she could try. The warrior took up her dagger. She said that she did not know how useful it would be, and suggested that the master watch carefully. As soon as the girl's weapon flashed in her hands, sparks burst from her eyes. She prepared for battle, and it was as if she herself had turned into a deadly weapon. Having escaped from the ambush at great speed, the girl burst into the goblin cave like lightning. She used her instant strike skill, and the confused goblins didn't even have time to react before they were killed. It took the beast girl a few seconds to destroy all the enemies in the cave. Tsuyoshi, who had been watching the battle from cover, stood up from the bushes and, smiling broadly, clapped his hands in admiration. Such movements from a level 72nd warrior. How cool! The girl smiled contentedly. She was pleased with Tsuyoshi's praise. She blinked her eyes and said that the master was so kind. The girl explained that she always gives it her all, even against low-level opponents, and she really hoped that this helped the master. Tsuyoshi asked if she could teach him the technique she used. The girl looked down sadly and said that the instant strike was a skill for high-level warriors, so the master would not be able to learn it. Besides, he had not yet chosen a profession. Tsuyoshi, smiling, replied that he too would become a warrior, since he had a girl with him, and he was sure that he could easily copy her skills without worrying about his own profession. But since he can't use the divine hammer of the king, he must find a replacement weapon. The system notified Tsuyoshi that he has chosen the profession of a warrior. The girl timidly and gratefully took Tsuyoshi's hand, and looking at him in surprise, asked if it was really because of her that he had chosen the profession of a warrior, and said that she would try to be useful to him. Taking her master by the hand, the girl exclaimed that she would help him level up. But first she offered to pick out some combat equipment for him. The young man felt a flush of heat. He thought how wonderful this world was. The girl's closeness greatly excited him. There was an awkward pause, but at that moment the sentries entered the goblin cave, shouting that it was time to change. The goblin warriors saw their brothers dead and shouted angrily that this was an invasion. Without a second thought, the goblins rushed into battle. Tsuyoshi looked at the enemies that suddenly appeared and said that it seemed like he would have to deal with them alone. The young man asked the girl to lend him her dagger. He wanted to try something. As soon as he picked up the weapon, the system notified him that he had received a silver dagger. The girl was a little worried about her master and warned that attracting the enemy in this way was a little unwise. But Tsuyoshi had already formed a plan in his head. Clutching the weapon in his hands, the young man thought that he had not yet fully tested the power of the Sky Shaker and decided that these goblins would be his test subjects. Tsuyoshi concentrated, took a deep breath. He was a little nervous because this would be his first real fight. The goblins were approaching. Tsuyoshi pushed off the ground and called upon the Sky Shaker skill. To the goblins' surprise, a guy in strange equipment fell on them almost from the sky. Stones rained down on the surprised goblins, and flames erupted from the silver dagger. The combat skill copied from General Ryota instantly destroyed all the goblins. The girl was surprised. Even a team of 6 heroes would have had difficulty defeating goblins of the same level so quickly. A pleased Tsuyoshi noted that it was easier than he thought and told the girl that he would deal with the rest. He was beginning to like the divine selection system. The girl apologized to the master for the inconvenience and offered him to use her weapon again. But Tsuyoshi approached the defeated goblins and decided not to use the girl's dagger anymore, but to arm himself with the goblin's club. Taking a wooden club in his hands, he told his companion not to worry. This club wasn't so bad either. The girl looked at her master and said that they should quickly get the basic equipment, because Tsuyoshi was practically defenseless now. The young man looked at his torn suit and thought that it was true. Without equipment, he was too susceptible to attacks. Now his defense was 0, which meant he needed armor. As they walked through the cave, the young man remembered that he had managed to find out something about the divine inventory of consciousness. This place exists in the human consciousness independently of the real world. Currently, Tsuyoshi only has 2 slots available. Unlike a normal inventory, items from the divine consciousness inventory can be used in both worlds, which is very interesting. Looking at his status again, Tsuyoshi saw that he currently only had 2 slots, and one of them was occupied by a hammer. Apparently, the divine inventory of consciousness would improve along with Tsuyoshi's skills, but he didn't know how to increase the slots since he couldn't throw out a hammer, and having only one was too inconvenient. In both worlds, all equipment is divided into 5 types. Tsuyoshi, thinking, admired his companion. She asked the master in surprise if there was something on her face and why he was looking at her so strangely. The guy thought that girls with ears were simply impossible to resist. I wonder what other species exist in this world. Tsuyoshi smiled sheepishly and said that it was okay. He just wanted to make sure she was following him. But Tsuyoshi's companion saw that stronger goblins were approaching her master from behind, and she warned him of the danger. The languid Tsuyoshi didn't immediately understand what was going on, but the girl immediately pulled out a dagger, ready to rush into battle. This time, 4th-level goblins were walking towards them, and when they saw the girl, they laughed because they had come across a woman. Pushing her master aside, the girl rushed into battle. She exclaimed that the further they went, the stronger the goblins became, and asked Tsuyoshi to be more careful. But the young man had already gotten into the swing of things, and he replied that this meant the experience points they earned would also increase. To the girl's surprise, Tsuyoshi stopped her and asked her not to interfere, otherwise he would not get the experience. Armed with a club, the young man rushed at his confused enemies. They called him a fool. But Tsuyoshi didn't listen to anyone. Armed with a wooden goblin club, he rushed at his enemies at great speed, dealing them crushing blows. The confused goblins were unable to even put up much resistance, and soon they were all defeated. The young man was greatly helped by his perfect physical form, which he took advantage of, sparks bursting from his eyes. In a matter of minutes, all the goblins were dead, and the girl was surprised that her master was so skilled with a simple wooden club and was able to defeat enemies taller than him. Tsuyoshi's companion watched her master with interest as he defeated 4 goblins, gaining experience points even though he was only level 3. During the fight, his club broke, and the young man thoughtfully said that the higher the enemy's level, the more experience points he would earn, but the weapon turned out to be too fragile. The girl thought that the master possessed incredible strength. He wielded a wooden club as if his level was much higher. He defeated several enemies at once, despite the difference in levels. The deeper Tsuyoshi and the girl went into the location, the higher the levels of the goblins became and the greater their number. However, the strength of the young man made their numbers insignificant. The guy's experience was constantly growing, and his companion was completely delighted, exclaiming that the master was simply incredible, although his skill was good, but the weapon was simply terrible. Nevertheless, there were only 6 goblins left. Tsuyoshi didn't expect the bonus points in this world to be so high. He felt like he was quickly getting stronger, and now he had finished off the last goblin. When the young man worked as a scavenger, the heroes complained that the experience of 3rd and 4th level kobolds barely reached 10, and if they rarely entered the dungeon, they would not be able to increase their levels. In Tsuyoshi's world, the Hero Alliance requires a team to be assembled and the experience to be divided equally. And he heard the heroes talking about the guild taking everything for itself. But in this world, Tsuyoshi would be able to earn experience that was given for killing the monsters here. And it was simply incredible. The system showed that his experience was 2,100 out of 3,000. He's leveling up so fast. At this rate, he'll have to fight a boss soon. And indeed, heavy footsteps were heard from the depths of the cave. A huge boss was heading towards Tsuyoshi and his companion. Tsuyoshi peeked out from behind the rock. It looked like the goblin boss was approaching them. His appearance was all too familiar to Tsuyoshi, and the young man immediately began to sweat. The boss was exactly like the one because of whom Karina is now in the hospital and her parents died. The girl said that unfortunately this boss was possessed by darkness. Tsuyoshi was surprised. Is there really darkness in this world too? He said that in his world there is also darkness. I wonder if it is the same here. This dark goblin looks exactly the same as the one who killed Tsuyoshi's father and mother. Maybe it is him. The girl said that enemies possessed by darkness are dangerous. This boss is level 6, but because of the darkness, his strength increases exponentially. The girl explained that the darkness not only possessed crushing power, its very existence was shrouded in mystery, so she wanted to deal with this boss herself. But Tsuyoshi exclaimed no. He wanted to deal with him himself either now or in the future. He didn't know how the darkness was connected with other worlds, but he was sure that he would definitely kill them all. Swinging his club, Tsuyoshi rushed at the giant monster. Anger overwhelmed him. He shouted that he would kill this monster with his own hands, kill the one who killed his father and mother. The girl called out to her master in confusion. Tsuyoshi shouted that this damn darkness had ruined his sister Karina's life. The young man summoned the copied Heaven Shaker skill. Lightning flashed from the boy's eyes as he angrily screamed at the goblin boss to die. Using his Sky Shaker skill, Tsuyoshi jumped onto the very top of the boss and began to strike him. But this enemy was too strong for him. The boss quickly threw him off, and the young man rolled head over heels across the stone floor of the cave. Bloodied and with his clothes torn, Tsuyoshi fell among rocks and clouds of smoke. The guy felt a trickle of blood flowing from his mouth. The young man cursed. This boss turned out to be really strong. Meanwhile, the giant goblin opened its huge, toothy mouth to finish off its impudent human enemy. A giant snake-like tongue emerged from the goblin's gaping mouth and headed towards Tsuyoshi. But then the master's companion came to his aid, cutting the boss's tongue with a silver dagger, and shouted to Tsuyoshi to use the weapon. Anger helped Tsuyoshi to his feet. Shaking with rage, he cried out that this creature was trying to kill him, but he would not let the creature that took the lives of his parents kill him. Tsuyoshi's eyes lit up with a golden light. He wanted to kill this monster at any cost. The system informed the young man that the absolute physical form had been activated. The guy clenched his fist, and his whole body was filled with incredible strength. His veins bulged, and golden flashes danced around him. In the blink of an eye, Tsuyoshi's body changed, now becoming much larger and stronger, turning into a fighting machine. The guy was ready to tear the dark goblin boss to shreds with his bare hands. Clenching his fists, he rushed into battle. The system warned the young man that the power was concentrated in his right hand. It was incredibly tense, so the fighter needed to be careful. Tsuyoshi shouted that if he didn't have a weapon, then his body would become one. The young man clenched his right fist even tighter, turning into a spring and rushing towards the surprised goblin boss. Tsuyoshi turned into a raging golden whirlwind, obsessed with the idea of killing the boss who killed his parents and maimed his sister. Pushing off the ground, Tsuyoshi rushed at the monster, striking it with incredible force. Approaching the boss's head, the young man, his eyes blazing with anger, dealt him such a crushing blow that the monster, possessed by darkness, swayed. The girl watched in surprise as her master's blow sent the huge goblin boss spinning and falling. She never ceased to be amazed at the guy. Apparently, it was not for nothing that the king's divine hammer chose him. Meanwhile, Tsuyoshi did not stop, striking his enemy blow after blow, and finally an explosion followed. The dark goblin who killed Tsuyoshi's parents and disfigured Karina has been defeated. The young man watched with satisfaction as the pieces of the torn boss swirled around the cave. It was incredible that he, a simple scavenger, was able to defeat the monster. The system reported that Tsuyoshi's level had increased, and the youth whispered that he would exterminate all darkness. The girl looked at her master with concern, and finally, turning to him, she asked what happened to his hand. Indeed, Tsuyoshi's right hand was shaking violently and began to darken, and the young man sighed heavily. The system notified the boy that his arm was seriously injured and was at risk of necrosis. Now the young man's entire body was shaking, and large drops of sweat were running down his face. He cursed, saying that he had used too much force. As he was losing consciousness, Tsuyoshi saw a system note that since he had concentrated his power in his right hand, it would not be able to withstand the energy load. Tsuyoshi felt his strength leaving him. A shadow fell over the young man's face. He swayed and began to fall. The girl called out to her master in horror. The guy fell right into the arms of his companion and, losing consciousness, whispered that his arm hurt. Laying the young man's head on her lap, the girl quickly took out her travel bag and told the master not to worry. She had a first aid kit. An hour later, flying cats flew to the scene of the battle at the girl's request and began a healing ritual. Soon, Tsuyoshi woke up and felt much better. The flying cats bowed respectfully to the girl and left, having completed their work. The young man was surprised that recovery in this world was much slower, but much more effective. Perhaps the history of pharmacology in this world is very ancient. Seeing that Tsuyoshi had recovered, the girl was as happy as a child. The guy really felt much better. When it became clear that the master had fully recovered, the girl reminded him that they could now go and collect their well-deserved reward. The flying cats showed the girl the way to the treasure in the goblin boss's cave. Tsuyoshi completely forgot about the reward and, dancing, followed his companion. Upon entering the goblin cave, Tsuyoshi received a system notification that he had broken the record by defeating the boss of the cave. So instead of a partial reward, he would receive the full one. The young man did not immediately understand what exactly this meant. It was only clear that the reward had been increased. Seeing the reward that awaited them, the girl gasped. It was a chest with the treasures of darkness. Tsuyoshi was stunned. This type of reward is quite rare. It is difficult to find even at auctions. The young man remembered how he worked and was glad to find even a piece of the shield. Finally, his efforts had paid off. The boy was delighted at how wonderful this world really was. Opening the chest, Tsuyoshi looked inside with curiosity. This was his first well-deserved reward. The system reported that he had received a dark goblin set. The girl was delighted. They were very lucky to receive a whole set. It will be very useful to the master for the next battles. Having closed the chest, Tsuyoshi thought, he only had one space left in his inventory. Would this set fit there? The system asked the young man if he wanted to save the set to his inventory. He had 2 slots in his divine consciousness inventory, and only one free. The guy decided to take a risk and clicked yes. He didn't know if the set counted as one item. If he put it in the inventory, it would take up one slot or several. But Tsuyoshi's fears were unfounded. The system notified him that he had added the dark goblin set to his inventory and could use it at any time. The young man smiled broadly. It worked. The girl was surprised, looking at her master, and finally asked why he was smiling like that. The guy embarrassedly replied that he was just admiring the award. Turning to his companion, he asked if she knew how to sew. She answered in the affirmative and said that she had been sewing her own clothes since childhood, so she always carried a sewing kit with her. The companions chose a convenient and safe place and stopped. The girl got to work to sew clothes for her master. Soon she handed him a sparkling t-shirt and, smiling, said that everything was ready, asking the master if he liked it. Tsuyoshi was delighted. He thanked his companion and, trying on the t-shirt, said that it turned out just great. The girl smiled contentedly and said that she was glad to serve him. But no matter how much Tsuyoshi disliked this world, he knew that since he had leveled up, it was time for him to go back, so that his companion would not notice his absence. He said that they should stop here for the night to rest. The girl agreed with her master in everything. It was still night in the human world, and the young man's journey to another world went unnoticed. A golden portal began to spin in Tsuyoshi's room. The boy was returning home to his apartment. Falling tiredly onto the bed, the guy sighed with relief. Finally, he was home. Tsuyoshi and the girl had a hard time finding a place to spend the night, and the young man had to wait until she fell asleep to return to his world. Hugging the cozy pillow on his own bed, Tsuyoshi whispered that he had received a lot of useful things this time. Already half asleep, the guy thought that he would not be able to stop time in this world, and therefore he needed to get some sleep and regain his strength. Tomorrow, together with the novice heroes, he will go into the cave for the first time. It's good that he has already gained a little experience. The next day, Tsuyoshi woke up in a great mood. Everything was going as well as possible. The guy decided to figure out his new acquisition. The system asked if he wanted to put on the Dark Goblin set. Tsuyoshi clicked yes to see what kind of set it was and how to use it. It turns out this set has a special skill, Tearing Tentacles. When the skill is activated, all low-level enemies scream, freeze in place, and the user's hand turns into a giant tentacle that deals a fatal blow. Tsuyoshi was delighted. It's incredible. There's even a special skill here. It'll be fun. But the guy understood that he couldn't show this costume to the other heroes. Unfortunately, in his world, heroes kill each other to steal high-level equipment. Besides, if a newbie is seen in such a suit, they will definitely suspect that something is wrong. And then the system gave another surprise. It reported that Tsuyoshi could disguise his equipment as ordinary clothing. Great move. Disguise it as regular clothes, yeah, that's just great, and I pressed yes, the equipment immediately became invisible. There were only a few minutes left before the meeting at the cave, and Tsuyoshi thought he needed a little snack. At this time, the recently purchased phone in his pocket rang. The young man was surprised who could be calling him at this time. Picking up the receiver, he heard the worried voice of the head nurse. She asked if he was Karina's brother. Some people broke into the hospital and wanted to take her away, saying that she owed them money. The woman begged Tsuyoshi to come quickly. The guy had to take out a loan to pay the hospital bills, but why did these people come for Karina? Tsuyoshi paid everything on time. He shouted into the phone so that the nurse wouldn't let them touch the girl. The nurse replied that these people had taken away the landline phone and begged them to come quickly. In anger, Tsuyoshi squeezed the fragile mobile phone receiver hard, and it shattered into pieces. The young man cursed. His eyes turned bloodshot. The guy had started a new quest that could bring him 6,000 experience points. Without taking off his dark goblin outfit, the young man hurried to the hospital. Meanwhile, Karina's frightened screams could be heard in the hospital. She begged the men to wait for her brother. The girl was transferred from her hospital bed to a transport chair, but Karina desperately resisted, begging them not to touch her. The bandit, smiling, replied that there were reasons for this. Her brother owed them money and did not pay it back on time, so they were taking her away. The bandit, covered in gold, handed the girl a contract. They borrowed money from Tsuyoshi because they liked the girl. She would be worth a lot on the black market. The fact that she couldn't walk would please the rich. The scoundrel added these conditions to the contract. The brat didn't even notice anything. The bandit was sure that he would take Karina and have fun with her as much as he wanted. Karen indignantly responded that her brother would never have signed such an agreement. They had simply deceived him. But the bandit scornfully said that they were not interested in Tsuyoshi's meager payments, as long as he was going to repay the principal debt. The bandit unceremoniously looked at Karina's pretty face and warned that if she agreed in a good way, they would spare her. The girl tensed, trying to break free from the man's tenacious hands, tears of resentment and contempt flowing from her eyes. But the bandit didn't seem to be bothered by this. He broke into a smile and said that if Karina refused, she would be very sorry. At this time, heavy footsteps were heard in the hospital corridor. Someone was approaching the room where Karina was located very quickly. There was a deafening blow, and some very strong man broke down the door locked by the bandits. The frightened mafiosi asked each other who it was. Tsuyoshi's body filled with strength. His veins bulged, and his eyes bloodshot, blazing with anger. He barked at the uninvited guest to get ready. The young man was still holding the hospital room door he had just broken down, and he looked questioningly at the men gathered around Karina. 3 thugs stood next to Karina's wheelchair and stared at the guy with wide eyes. He had changed a lot since their last meeting. The delighted girl whispered that her brother had finally come to save her. The main bandit standing opposite Karina looked at Tsuyoshi and with a grin suggested that everyone should look and see who had come to visit them. Seeing the clenched fists and anger in the young man's eyes, the bandit asked why he was angry, that such was the agreement, and why he needed such a pathetic sister anyway. Instead of answering, Tsuyoshi punched the bandit in the face, knocking out several of his teeth, causing blood to gush from his mouth and shattering his glasses. With the next blow, the young man sent the impudent bandit into the far corner of the room. The system reported that Tsuyoshi had increased his leg strength and his movement speed had increased. The mafia boss crashed into medical equipment and fell helplessly to the floor of the hospital room. One of the bandits rushed to the boss's aid, calling Tsuyoshi a freak. The tall bandit swung his huge fist at the young man, confident that he would now smash this kid against the wall. The guy's eyes flashed angrily. To the thug's surprise, he wasn't afraid of them at all. The counterattack that Tsuyoshi used twisted the bandit's arm like a meat grinder, causing the huge man to feel pain. The fighter, considered invincible among the bandits, fell to his knees, his whole body shaking, and he continued to scream, clutching his twisted arm. The leader of the group angrily clenched his teeth. He called Tsuyoshi a piece of shit and said that no one had ever defeated him. The bandit pulled a pistol from his bosom and pointed it at the young man. He asked if he really wanted to destroy the Blue Snake Gang. The angry bandit shot at the guy, shouting for him to take a bullet since he couldn't pay his debts. Karina screamed, "No!" in horror. Her eyes were full of tears. She was terrified of losing her brother. The bullet flew straight at Tsuyoshi, but the young man didn't even flinch. He didn't try to dodge the bullet, as if he was clad in armor. To everyone's surprise, the young man simply extended his hand and caught the bullet. Light smoke came out of the young man's fist, and the bullet did not cause him any harm. Karina looked at her older brother with wide eyes. She did not understand what was happening and how her sweet brother was able to catch a bullet in flight. The bandits were stunned, stuttering. They asked each other how this kid caught a bullet with his bare hands. It simply couldn't be possible. Tsuyoshi contemptuously threw the bullet on the floor and said that he was a hero after all. The bandits looked at the guy with fear. Sweating profusely, they huddled close to each other and stuttered, asking if he really was a hero. They didn't know that. Meanwhile, the head nurse hurried the police officer and said that some men had burst into the ward and started threatening the patient and her brother. When the nurse and the police entered the room, the bandits very politely asked Mr. Tsuyoshi to repay the debt as soon as possible, otherwise their boss would not stand aside. The beaten thugs bowed and, leaving, said that it was time for them to go, apologizing to Tsuyoshi for calling him. The nurse looked questioningly at the beaten bandits in torn clothes, who just a few minutes ago had behaved completely differently. The beaten messenger of the Blue Snake Gang boss cursed under his breath. How could this guy become a hero? He would have to report this to the boss. Their boss is a level 100 warrior, and they would easily destroy this kid. Karina sighed with relief and said that finally those bandits left. Tsuyoshi apologized to his sister that he rarely visited her. The young man said that the Blue Snake would return if they didn't pay them. The guy had been dealing with debts all this time, but now he had become a hero, so there was nothing to worry about. Karina was genuinely surprised that her brother had really become a hero. Tsuyoshi confirmed, but he is still a newbie and will be officially recognized when he goes down into the cave today. The young man borrowed $60,000 from the gang for Karina's treatment. Earning that amount of money would take a long time, even taking into account the hero's work, which means he would have to sell all his hero equipment. The guy was sure that today the hard times would end and he would officially become a hero. Gaia stood at the entrance to the cave and asked his students if everyone was ready to enter the cave. He said that today they would see if the newcomers were ready to become heroes. Gaia said that there were several rules. First of all newcomers must hand over to him the heroic equipment that they find in the cave. The young heroes unanimously answered that they understood everything. Tsuyoshi heard about this. It seems the heroic alliance is simply turning a blind eye to it. Well, there is most likely nothing valuable in a low-level cave anyway. Gaia continued regarding the test. He suggested that no one should worry because he, a 9th-level warrior, would be going with them. And if they followed his instructions, everything would be fine. As a thank you for his work, the newbies must pay him 20,000 yen each. Gaia looked around at everyone and asked if they understood. Most were unhappy, but they still agreed. Tsuyoshi raised his hand and asked why they should pay the trainer when he would get all the equipment from the cave anyway, and then the trainees would have no money left at all. One of the newbies whispered to Tsuyoshi to keep quiet. Guy was from the Crazy Wolves Guild. The guild was covering for him. The young man understood why Gaia was asking for money so brazenly. But Tsuyoshi would never pay such a person. The coach said with a grin that such were his rules. The hero mentor laughed and said that if there was no money, the young man could take the test alone. Guy silently called this boy an idiot and thought that he didn't care about his provocations. The newcomers were worried. Everyone had heard that no one had ever taken the test alone, and most of the guys thought Tsuyoshi was a fool to argue with the examiner over some 20,000. But, to the surprise of everyone present, Tsuyoshi calmly threw up his hands and said that in that case he would take the test alone. The guys timidly asked Tsuyoshi if he was serious. Maybe he had mixed something up or misunderstood, because it was very dangerous. Tsuyoshi stubbornly lowered his head and said that he understood everything perfectly. The administrator came up and asked to conduct the check again. He whispered to Tsuyoshi that although this was a C-rank cave, it was incredibly dangerous for beginners. The young man thanked him for the advice and said that he had already decided everything and asked permission to go. The administrator wished the newcomer good luck, but thought to himself that he was crazy. With a shaking hand, the man made a note on his tablet. The system confirmed that trainee Tsuyoshi Tsukishiro submitted an application to take the test alone. The type of this cave was forest. The system recommended 5 or more participants with a power of 600 or more. Tsuyoshi entered the cave and looked around with interest. He had only seen caves after clearing out the heroes before, but this is what they looked like before. Then Tsuyoshi heard an enemy appear behind him. It seemed to be a goblin. A goblin dropped silently from the tree behind Tsuyoshi, hoping to attack the lone newcomer. At the time of testing, Tsuyoshi's combat power was already 6,400, and he could also use equipment and skills. The young man's eyes lit up in anticipation of the fight. Turning to the goblin, he said with a grin that surprise attacks did not work on him. The dark goblin that came down from the tree was quite strong, and he growled in surprise when he saw that the young man was not at all afraid of him. Taking up a wooden goblin club, Tsuyoshi met the goblin with a blow. He said that this dark goblin was indeed quite strong, but compared to his current power, this enemy was simply insignificant. For killing one goblin, Tsuyoshi received only 20 experience points. The young man knew that in this world, the experience gained from defeating real enemies was different from the experience in another world. Turning to the other goblins who were hiding in the foliage of the trees, the young man told them not to hide and to attack. Obeying the man's call, the goblins fell from the trees like peas. They were absolutely sure that they were facing a weak enemy. But for Tsuyoshi, this situation turned out to be just perfect. He immediately removed the disguise from his dark goblin set. As soon as the equipment appeared on the young man, he activated the special skill Roaring Tentacles and directed them at his enemies crowded around. Numerous deadly tentacles shot up over the forest, killing all the goblins that came down from the trees and approached Tsuyoshi. Pieces of goblins flew in all directions, and the young man continued to call upon his enemies to attack him. The administrator waited anxiously for the young man at the entrance to the cave. Almost an hour passed. The man was sure that if the intern had lasted there for so long, everything was going well. The man was surprised. Such a fearless newcomer. No one in their right mind took the test alone. It looks like this guy will soon be written about in the newspapers. The administrator mumbled in surprise. The results of the individual test were updated again. Trainee Tsuyoshi Tsukishiro passed the test. According to the system, trainee Tsukishiro received 960 experience points in the cave. At that very moment, Tsuyoshi emerged from the cave and, turning to the administrator, asked where he could take a shower. The rest of the newcomers left the cave dejectedly. They all passed the test for money but were very unhappy with Guy. The corrupt mentor barked at his students, saying that if it weren't for him, they would all have died. They became heroes without even having basic skills. 20,000 is still cheap. The boys, with their heads down, grumbled that Gaia himself had told them not to interfere. The mentor had refused to help. And besides, the boys had entered the cave first, and Gaia hadn't even given them any instructions. But Gaia said that at that level, they should pay him 40,000. He lowered the price so as not to listen to the whining of newbies. But then the coach's phone rang, and he asked the caller to get to the point because Guy was busy. The caller's message shocked the coach. He couldn't believe his ears. He was told that Tsuyoshi had passed the test alone. Gaia was furious. It was simply impossible. Meanwhile, the young man was taking a shower after leaving the cave, and Guy, in a rage, demanded an explanation of how he did it. The coach said that the young man was only at level 4. How could he defeat the goblins alone? The mentor was sure that the young man must have used high-level equipment. None of the newcomers had ever taken this test themselves. Tsuyoshi replied that this did not mean that it was impossible in principle. Apparently, the whole point was that otherwise he would have to give 20,000. Gaia was furious. He grabbed Tsuyoshi by the shirt and shouted that this boy was making fun of him and demanded to answer, because Gaia was a member of the Crazy Wolves Guild. The guy chuckled and said that with a 9th level and a combat power of 1,200, it seems that this guild is not that strong. Gaia swung his fist at Tsuyoshi and asked in a rage, "Who does this boy think he is? How dare he insult a hero?" But the threats had no effect on Tsuyoshi. He calmly extended his hand and stopped the fist aimed at him. The guy looked straight and hard into Gaia's eyes and asked if he really wanted to beat him to death with his 9-level fists. The bribe-taking mentor was overcome with sweat. Where did this young man get such speed and power? Guy couldn't believe that he was only level 4. Gaia shook with anger. He was literally choking and could not utter a word. None of the newcomers had ever insulted him, much less offered resistance. A blade flashed in the trainer's hands. This boy made him feel uneasy and even afraid. Tsuyoshi, seeing the weapon in the mentor's hands, looked at him questioningly and exclaimed that he should stop. Where had he seen a mentor attack a trainee with a blade? Guy's eyes flashed with anger. He swung his blade at Tsuyoshi and demanded to know what he was hiding. Tsuyoshi blocked the blow from the dagger that Guy dealt him with his hand. The defensive effect of the Dark Goblin set plus his absolute physical form protected the youth from the attack. Seeing that the dagger had broken, Gaia stuttered and asked how this was possible, since he had struck the newcomer's bare hand. The mentor of young heroes continued to advance on the young man, asking if the boy was apparently hiding some kind of equipment, high-level armor. Tsuyoshi remained silent. He accidentally showed his abilities, although he knew that he shouldn't reveal his secret to people from this world. Now there would most likely be negative consequences. Gaia tried in every way to get the guy to tell him that he probably had something good. The mentor asked if he had found it in the cave or stolen it. The young man tried to feign confusion. His head literally spun. And he plaintively answered his mentor that he was so scared. Tsuyoshi, almost in tears, told his mentor that without the dagger he found in the cave, he would never have survived. The trainer of young trainees watched the boy and did not know whether to believe him or not. At this time, the administrator's voice was heard from behind Tsuyoshi, the man apologizing to the young man for the wait. The administrator said that his certificate was ready. Now, Tsukishiro-san was officially a hero. The young man thanked him and said that he would be there soon. Turning his back to the coach, the guy thought that the administrator was his savior, because Guy wouldn't make a scene in front of the staff. But the mentor looked after the trainee greedily. He was sure that the boy was hiding something and dreamed of taking possession of this equipment. Tsuyoshi silently followed the administrator to get his certificate. He could feel Gaia literally staring at his back. The young man slowly looked around. Thanks to the system, his combat power had become much higher than that of the average level 4 hero. But fighting high-level enemies was still difficult. Evening came. Tsuyoshi went home and decided to think about the situation. It seems like Tsuyoshi has attracted Guy's attention. There are no girls with ears in this world, and his level is still low, so he should be more careful from now on. At this time, 2 dark figures crept silently, like shadows, through the house in which Tsuyoshi lived. Finally, they found the right door. It was the door that led to the young man's apartment. The 2 figures stopped to make sure that it was here. Gaia told his companion that when he broke down the door, he should immobilize the young man with the help of magic. In the corridor stood members of the Crazy Wolves Guild, Gaia, and a 10th level mage. The newcomer's mentor took out a dagger, and with a sparkle in his eyes said that they would soon get the treasure that this boy was hiding. The magician hissed at his companion, warning him to be quieter, otherwise the young man might hear them ahead of time. Guy's companion prepared his staff and said that they would first destroy the chain with magic. The magician brought his staff to the lock and directed the magical flame at it. Soon the lock was broken and the door was open. But suddenly the door swung open and Tsuyoshi appeared on the threshold, armed with a goblin club, and the uninvited guests were at a loss. Tsuyoshi, clenching his teeth, said through gritted teeth, looking at Guy, that he turned out to be a very quick scoundrel, having decided to rob and kill his own student. Swinging his club at the mage, Tsuyoshi shouted that he would destroy him. The youth called upon General Ryota's Heaven Shaker skill. The guy frowned. That scoundrel Gaia brought a 10th level mage with him? The difference in levels was too great. The guy knew that he would not be able to defeat such opponents for sure. Combat power is just one indicator for evaluating a hero's abilities. His is 6,400, but the level is too low, Tsuyoshi could have won if the difference wasn't so big. His opponents can compensate for their low combat power with their level. It's like a low-level warrior fighting a weak, high-level boss. The young man realized that there was no point in rushing into battle, relying only on skills and equipment, because if he failed, he would be finished. They would simply kill him. The magician screamed that the guy was trying to trick him. Fortunately, he had strengthened the protection of his cloak, and now he would kill Tsuyoshi and take everything for himself. The magician pointed his magic staff at the young man and summoned a wave of fire, the raging flames engulfing the young man. Tsuyoshi felt that it was very hot. The suit was immune to physical attacks, but not to magic. Fighting the goblins turned out to be much easier. The guy realized that he had to run, otherwise he would lose. Guy shouted loudly for the magician to catch him. In desperation, Tsuyoshi ran into the apartment and jumped out the window. The guy decided that he would focus on improving his legs. With the protection of the dark goblin suit, he will be able to land softly. Confident that his opponents were behind him, the young man hoped to land on the asphalt and run away. The system reported that Tsuyoshi had increased the physical strength of his legs and reminded him that the rest of his body was now unprotected. Suddenly, the young man saw that here too he was being pursued by Guy's comrades. Another member of the Crazy Wolves Guild struck Tsuyoshi out of the air. His pursuers had thought of everything and set up an ambush. Guy's companion shouted that he had caught the fugitive. Laughing, he asked the young man. Apparently, he did not expect to see him here. The warrior of the Crazy Wolves Guild dealt a crushing blow to Tsuyoshi and, laughing, exclaimed that it was a pity. This young hero would surely die. It was good that the young man had increased his entire body's physical strength during the fall. But he was hit by a knee because he had previously removed his defense. But with the help of the Dark Goblin set, he could reduce the damage. The surprised magician asked Tsuyoshi if he was still alive and how he managed to survive such a fall. The mage was curious about what skill the young man used when he attacked him. How could a newbie do such a thing? Enraged by the hero's vile behavior, Tsuyoshi thought in anger that he was ready to kill them and activated his Dark Goblin set equipment. The young man activated the special skill Roaring Tentacles to destroy his pursuers, who clearly wanted to kill him in order to rob him. The heroes did not expect such a turn of events, and the three figures began to shake. None of them wanted to die. But the mage quickly got his bearings and placed restrictions on Tsuyoshi's actions. The restriction stops the target for 1.5 seconds if the enemy's level is lower than the user's. The special skill was blocked, Tsuyoshi cursed. This mage stopped him. Gaia and his friends rushed at the young man again. The members of the Crazy Wolf Guild laughingly said that they would kill the boy and divide the spoils. But then, a system notification came that the Infinity Ring's recovery time had expired and the Endless Passage could be opened. Here was salvation. Tsuyoshi quickly commanded the ring to open an endless passage, and as Gaia and his companions rushed towards the boy, they saw only a bright golden flash. As he moved to another world, Tsuyoshi shouted to his enemies that he remembered them and that he would return stronger and defeat them. Finding himself in another world, Tsuyoshi breathed a sigh of relief. He was finally able to escape. Now the young man was convinced that he had to learn new skills. He had become too carried away with equipment, and without skills he would not survive. But everything was in his hands. In order to learn the skills, he needed the girl's help. He wanted to call out to her and turned around to look at his companion. But when the young man saw the girl, he felt a flush of excitement and blood started pouring from his nose. He completely forgot that she was still sleeping. The sweet girl with touching ears was sleeping peacefully. Her figure was so seductive that the young man forgot about everything in the world. The girl turned on her side in her sleep, and Tsuyoshi was enveloped in the scent of cherry blossoms. His companion always smelled like cherry blossoms. He had noticed this long ago. Tsuyoshi was overcome with an uncontrollable desire. He thought that he was not a man if he did not do something in this situation. His whole body tensed. The system reported that adrenaline had strengthened his muscles and he had increased strength, speed, and the work of his entire body. But then Tsuyoshi remembered Gaia and his friends, and he realized that first he had to kill those who were trying to kill him. The desire that had gripped the young man quickly faded away, and Tsuyoshi immediately felt weak. He fell to his knees and told himself that now was not the time for romantic infatuations. First, he had to sort out the problems in his world. Settling into the hut where his girlfriend slept, Tsuyoshi thought that he had to come up with a plan to raise his level and skills. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to survive in his world. Soon the sun rose, the leaves rustled merrily, and his beautiful companion woke up. Stretching sweetly, the girl said that for the first time in a long time she finally got enough sleep. Although Tsuyoshi was unable to sleep, he told his companion that he had also slept well and asked the girl if she could make him another suit. The young man shared his plans with her, And the girl said that in order to learn new skills, a master needs to obtain a skill scroll, and to do this, he must enroll in the Martial Arts Academy. The girl escorted her master to the Academy of Martial Arts of the Beastman tribe. The master of this academy came out to meet the travelers. He asked if this was the person who had attracted the attention of the Beast King. But to enter, one had to reach level 6 and then pass the test. And with level 4, it was still too early to enter. The young man was confused. What kind of bad luck was this? Why so early? The new t-shirt that the girl had sewn for him had a heart on it. Tsuyoshi's companion apologized. She had been training in the caves for so long that she didn't know about such rules. The young man replied that everything was fine. He needed to level up anyway and would come back later. The delighted girl said that in this case the master could increase his level in one cave. The head of the academy angrily exclaimed that he was a worthless person. The beastmen would not recognize him. If it were not for the king, they would tear him to shreds. He would not pass the exam even if he reached the 6th level. And he was also running around with that mongrel, a pathetic couple. The girl sadly lowered her head and said that it was her fault. The master had been so kind to her that she had forgotten her place, and her presence was causing him more trouble than good. The girl decided that she didn't want to disturb the master, which meant she needed to explain everything to him and say goodbye. Hearing the insult directed at his companion, Tsuyoshi turned sharply and headed back to the head of the Beastman Martial Arts Academy. The frightened girl tried to stop the master, but anger burned in Tsuyoshi. The veins on his body bulged, his fists clenched. The guy grabbed the head of the academy by the chest and, calling him names, asked what he said. Did he really want Tsuyoshi to rip out his tongue? Burning with anger, the boy demanded that the beastman immediately apologize to the girl. But the head of the academy laughed and asked where he was wrong. This girl is a cross between a man and a beast. She is half-beast. She doesn't even have a name. She is a disgrace to them all. The system explained that a half-beast is a half-blooded beastman, whose existence is despised by beastmen regardless of their level and status. They are not allowed to bear names. They are driven out of settlements. Tsuyoshi realized that meant she was a half-breed. That's why he didn't see her name that time. She didn't have one at all. And then Tsuyoshi saw that beastmen armed with bows appeared on the mountains. The head of the academy told the man not to be arrogant. If he behaved disrespectfully with the people, the head of the academy promised to destroy him. Laughing, the beastman said that he would apologize to the mongrel if the man passed the exam. But he was sure that a mere man was not capable of doing so. Tsuyoshi was still holding the head of the martial arts academy by the lapels, and silently listened to everything he said when a girl approached them. Turning to Tsuyoshi, she said that the master should not go through with this because of her. The boy let go of the huge beastman who ran the academy, turned around and said that this girl's name was now Sakura. Looking at the beastman, Tsuyoshi repeated that her name was Sakura, and demanded that he remember it. The girl blushed with embarrassment. She quietly repeated her name and asked the master if he really gave her such a name. As he walked away, the young man repeated to the head of the academy once again that he would remember his words. If he passed the exam, he would definitely apologize to Sakura for his words. After hugging his companion a little, Tsuyoshi told Sakura that it was time for them to go. The girl looked at her master in surprise, not believing that he had finally given her a name. Tsuyoshi and Sakura headed to the cave the girl had spoken of, where the young man would train and raise his level. Now the guy had to hunt a fox beastman. This species is quite rare. Tsuyoshi was ready for a fight and said that they would deal with him. The girl, having apologized to the master, asked him to explain why he gave her this particular name.